Now in Paris, there are two parallel worlds. One where interns are making 1,823 euros a month, the minimum wages, or as we say in French, le SMIC, to barely make ends meet. And on the other hand, we have people getting out of schools, their master's degree, and making north of 40,000 euros a year. Now, most people think that you need to be a genius to crack a deal like this, but all you need really is the right information, some privilege, and some purchasing power to do the things at the right time. In this video, I'm going to share with you why the French dream is alive and well. Now, I'm not suggesting that everybody who's watching this video should drop their careers, quit their jobs, and find a way to move to France. For many of the foreign friends that I have seen over the last decade over here in France, moving over here has actually been quite brutal. The transition is harsh. Most of the year is grey, it is a cold country. Making friends and stuff, the social angle, if you don't have that figured out and if you're not working towards that, you can end up with a lot of stress and loneliness. People put on a lot of weight, they get a little unhealthy, they lose their hair, and just moving back to their home countries where there is more sunshine, where they get into their routine, they look so much better just after a couple of weeks of going back home. So it's not necessarily for everyone. Now, if you're not prepared for the mental toil and the transition that this brings, this thing can break you. So it's nice to understand the ground reality of the market and see what you're up against before you move to France. Let's talk about that. If you're paying attention to the geopolitics, the news that's been happening lately between France and India or Europe and India, there's a lot of hope for how there will be exchange between these two nations. But for me, back in the day in 2016, even before all of this geopolitical arbitrage happened, it was kind of a no-brainer. I always have wanted to work and live in France. Whether that's you or not, this video is going to give you more clarity on whether the France dream is worth it. Now, I'm not here to sell you a postcard. Competing in France is getting harder and harder. The political climate has been unstable for the last some time. We've had Elisabeth Borne, Gabriel Attal, Michel Barnier, François Bayrou, and finally Sébastien Lecornu. And that's a lot of prime ministers for 2 years. In fact, Lecornu resigned a couple of days after being appointed. And 4 days after that, Macron just reappoints him. This whole climate has made it really hard for companies to take decisions, to invest, to predict the budget, and they are in this brace position. This is chaotic for French companies. There's this thing called the EURES, the European Commission, and I've referenced them in my videos in the past. They project 0.9% growth this year. And this number is very interesting when you compare it with Europe and when you compare it with the previous year. This year, 2026, the projection is 0.9 to 1 for France. For Europe, it's 1.4 to 1.5. Italy is doing better than France. Last year it was 0.8, 2025. And if you just look at the numbers before, the post-pandemic 2021 was 6.4% of growth. 6.4 after the pandemic rebound. So this is really it's a very difficult time. And let's be real, even before this whole debacle happened, I can share with you from my experience that competing back in 2019 was not really a cakewalk either. You're competing with Europeans who don't need a visa, and for a company, visa is a variable and an expense. Plus, if you've not really worked in a European context before, they're not sure if you'll be a great cultural fit. You know, while the European students don't have to worry about this, they were born and raised here, they would be a better cultural bet than you and I. For all of these reasons, it's hard to put your bet on an Indian student. They should really need you in order to give you their time of the day. It is what it is. So why is France still a good idea? If it's all just doom and gloom and we should just pack our bags and go back home, then what are we talking about? While the internal political climate is quite messy, the external dots are kind of lining up, and this is very promising for an expat at least. This week, Ursula von der Leyen was the guest of honor for our Republic Day in New Delhi. That's the first time EU leaders have headlined this event. She was here to finalize the mother of all deals, the India-Europe Free Trade Agreement. This deal connects 2 billion people and like a fourth of the global GDP. 60% of French employers have reported acute shortage in 3 fields: in IT, in green tech, and in engineering. And to stay competitive, that 44,000 passport talent thing that I spoke to you guys about in the last week's video, they pulled it down to 39,500 to make it more attainable for foreign talent to get a work permit and stay here in the long term. All of this has followed Macron's exchanges with India, which have been very promising. He promised by 2030 he wants to have 30,000 Indian students in France. And he also spoke about an 11 billion euro investment between France and India. I think it was over a decade. I don't really have the details of that, but I read this page and it was really interesting. It's called the Horizon 2047, and I think it's a really interesting read if you're an Indian student thinking of moving to France. The infrastructure is finally falling in place. Now, I've never tried it with my own UPI, but you can apparently pay with the UPI in the Eiffel Tower now. That's big. And I remember watching this with pride as an Indian expat when Prime Minister Modi was invited to the Bastille Day. There were these news clippings all over the place about France's interest in the UPI, and it was quite interesting to read. Now, I have a very interesting perspective about this. Is it really worth going through all of this struggle, all of this work to get a job and pay your rent when it could be much easier back home? And here's my perspective. Give me a second. I was having this coffee with an elderly gentleman back home in Mumbai about a year ago. This gentleman is retired and he's been following my journey over here in France since the time I moved here. So he asked me this thing: you went to work on this farm thing, you went to the Netherlands for an internship, then you came back to Paris for a job, and you were starting off living outside the city and trying to make it work, and you did COVID over here and you finally have a life in France. How do you know you're doing the right thing? And I was like, what is the right thing? What is right? I don't know. I enjoy this. So I really didn't know what he was getting to with this question. There must be so much discomfort when you go to work in somebody's house, when you did this in the farm. With all of this discomfort, how do you have the courage to, and I didn't really connect courage to that. I was very, very excited to do it. Perhaps a little naive, but very excited to do it. And here's where my perspective comes in handy. Doing the struggle thing, it forces you to ask yourself this question of what you really want to do with your time and with your life, what you want to learn and how you want to invest your time. It forces you these questions, because towards the end of the conversation, when I was discussing with him, I told him, well, now you're retired and now you don't really need to go out and work for money. You've got that thing sorted. You have a nice apartment. Life's okay for you. Then you should be able to spend more time in what you want, right? Like that's really what took me to the farm. It was a no-brainer because I didn't have to pay my rent for 3 months. I ended up making great friends. I learned the French language to fluency, like in really an environment where people actually speak French as opposed to a textbook. So it felt like when I heard about this farm possibility, it was a no-brainer for me. So I don't really see this as courageous. I see this as very exciting. When I was exchanging this with him, I was like, now that you're retired, you could browse calligraphy. You could browse learning a new language or learning a new instrument or painting or the arts, reading books, for instance, browsing a world that you never knew before. Like, at least when I'm retiring, I'm sure I want to do some of this Japanese stuff. I'm turning really French now. I have this attraction for Japanese literature because, yeah, I've observed how rich it is, and I would like to spend some time in it. Not today, when I'm retired. So then I asked him, don't you want to do this stuff? And he was like, no, I don't. I was like, well, what do you want to do? What makes you excited? And he said, I don't know. And my heart really goes out to him, because he's been focusing on providing for his life. He started off as a struggle, did not have enough money for himself or his family, but he started off as a struggle, and eventually life got easier. He got a good income, he had a nice house, he had his children. And throughout this whole journey, he didn't really ask himself this question of what he really wants. And I think that's the perspective I'm bringing to this. The struggle asks you what you really want to do. And it forces you to sit down in solitude, and you can't just spend your evenings away watching TV and coasting. I think that's what I would have done. If I wasn't forced to reinvent, I think that's what I would have done. So from that point of view, I think this is really a gift. Learning French is a real competitive advantage. There are so many state-run websites, one from France and one from the EU Commission, where you have information of where you can compete. If you're starting off with your career anyway, that's a great place to start because that's where they're hiring. And this information is available. In this market, you solve a pain point. And my strategy was quite simple. I targeted companies here in France which outsourced their development or relied on companies that had outsourced development in India, so that I can become the guy in the room who speaks both these languages. That was really my point of view. So I put all of my eggs in that French basket to learn the language really well. And it becomes like a really no-brainer when they're trying to hire me. Because the moment you say that I'm a really quick learner and they ask you, can you show me some examples? And you say, well, I learned French fluently over the last 2 years. And it's like, well, really? They can test you on their phone call, on that Teams meeting. They can just test you by switching to French. And this is an advantage, competitive advantage that you bring to the table that a local student couldn't bring. He's been speaking French all through his life, and English, yeah. Many French students now speak English. It's not that spectacular anymore. But a foreigner who's not raised in French, he's speaking the French language now with these culture cues, with this fluency, with this ease of expression, and he understands everything you're saying. Now, well, that's spectacular. Now, I've always maintained this. When people reach out to ask me what's the best move after you move to France, for me, it's always been learn French. That's your ultimate competitive advantage. So if you want to put all your eggs in that basket, maybe that's not a very good strategy, but it has worked out for me. Now, airplanes used to look like this. Bear with me for a second. Airplanes used to look like this, and now they look like this. Now, no matter which company you pick, I think there are two big ones in the world. No matter which one you pick, they end up looking like this. So there is a certain design that works. So When it comes to language learning as well, there is a path of least resistance. There is a certain design that works. You can do stuff that's fun for you, and you can do that for as long as you like. But if you're looking for really quick results, I've put all of these learnings in my handbook called FrenchMesh. I'm still fine-tuning the last few details of this book, but if you're interested, join the waitlist so you'll be the first one to know when the version 1 is out, and the version 1, I'll give it away for free. And this comparative advantage of making it a no-brainer hire when you're in the interview room, I've spoken about that in my Fit in France handbook. Both of the links will be down in the description. In next week's video, I'm intending to show you my pay slips from when I had my internships and my first job to show you the difference between the before tax and the after tax income. In French, we call it gross et brut. So I'm going to show you this in next week's video. If that's something that you're interested to, consider subscribing and hit that bell thing so you know when it's out. Thank you for tuning into this one. I'm going to finish my last little glass of wine and enjoy the rest of my Saturday afternoon. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you in the next video. Keep learning.